We're linked not just by geography, we are linked by choice.
That speech by Anthony Albanese there, making the point that our two countries are linked by choice. What did he mean by that?
Well, I think what he meant was that we do have relationships with the US and the UK, very strong traditional relationships, but we want to be here. This is our first priority. We brought a huge team of political leaders, of business leaders. Interesting there, he confirms Australia is going to the G20. Essentially, he didn't really want to sit at the same table as Vladimir Putin, if Putin does turn up to Bali, but he said then, I'm coming because of the work you've put into it. That's a sign of friendship. That's a major statement. He talked about the government will work with superannuation funds, which is a fascinating new sort of twist for a Labor leader who they brought in industry super. There's $1 trillion or so available. I'm going to use my persuasion to convince those funds to try to invest in Indonesia. That's quite interesting. Plus, there were lots of other sort of measures in there that I think would be music to the ears of the Indonesian leadership.
What about the commitment there of action on climate change? We saw that was very well received in the Pacific during the visits there by our Foreign Minister Penny Wong. That was mentioned there in that speech, albeit briefly, but has that been something that Indonesia has been wanting Australia to take more seriously?
Yes, it's a major issue for Indonesia, and it's interesting that Anthony Albanese is using that, so is Penny Wong, using the fact they ran harder on that in the election campaign and were different from the coalition. They're using that now, leveraging that in the region for foreign policy issues. That's a very interesting use of what had been a domestic policy in the election campaign up until 2 weeks ago.
Now, looking at the much softer diplomacy there, we saw language mentioned. Now, we know that Bahasa was taught in Australian primary schools, for example, in high schools. It was very much a thing of the 80s and 90s and really has been wound back. But a further commitment there that will be given priority, also scholarships here in Australia as well for people, students from Indonesia.
Scholarships, correct. And I think it was interesting that the Prime Minister referenced a couple of his own ministers who can speak some, form of Bahasa, or at least to some level, and he was using Bahasa obviously in his farewell and thank you at the end. So I think that is quite a smart sort of, as you say, soft diplomacy issue for them to be running, as well as the harder economic stuff.
And I mean, this visit has been largely successful so far. As we said earlier, we saw the lovely photos, pictures of them riding around the palace, and the offer for maybe not a ride around Lake Burley Griffin, but nonetheless another visit. So this has been so far a very successful visit by the incoming Prime Minister in what we were talking about earlier, John, is a rite of passage for incoming PMs in Australia.
That's right. If you looked at the first 2.5 weeks of the new government, it's pretty gold standard in terms of what they've done. 2 trips to the Pacific by the Foreign Minister Penny Wong. Now she's had her 3rd trip now to Jakarta. It's smart that they are saying, let's get our own neighbourhood into order. We can deal with the US and the UK and Boris Johnson at any point. Let's get our own house in order in this neighbourhood. It's smart, and it appears to be working. That looked like very much a goodwill exchange between those two leaders.
And we also heard Anthony Albanese reference his team there with him. Of course, he hasn't gone alone. Who is amongst that delegation, and how significant is that? A
lot of senior ministers, a lot of captains of industry. They're having a big dinner tonight in Jakarta with a lot of Indonesia's leading business people, as well as the head of the Commonwealth Bank from here and other organisations. And I think that sort of connection happening tonight in Jakarta, it's very important. And to happen so early in this Prime Ministership, I think is smart by the new government.